All right, so first things first, if you're going to be replacing your little vent tube, make sure you install it straight away. And I say that because I forgot to do it, and there's been a couple of times where I've had to pull pumps out because I noticed that the vent tube was still sitting on the bench. And I was feeling good about myself, you know, getting the end plate all dialed in correctly and ready to move on to the belly of the case when I see that vent tube sitting there. So if you're going to be replacing them on these transmissions at 204Rs, then install them even before you install the low reverse piston and everything else inside the case. So lather up all your sealing surfaces. You will have done this prior, but you know, check, make sure that there's no scoring anywhere on any of them. You'll have 3 of them down here. There's this one here, and then this one here. And then do the same for your piston. Alright, I failed to mention this when I was discussing the low reverse clutch pack earlier, but if you have a piston that ends in 725 on the last 3 digits of the casting number, do not use it. Replace it with either this one. I think there's an 850 piston. You'll have to consult the ATSG manual. I'll flash the particular page on the screen so that you at least, you know, have a sense of direction in terms of where to start. And I also discussed this at length in my low reverse deep dive video for these transmissions. So you can check that out if you want more details. All right, so you can't really use too much lube. You just want to make sure that you do not cut any of these square cut or machine cut seals on the way in. So this notch here is simply going to line up with the cutout in the case. So notch to cutout. All right, I think I'm home. So now all I'm gonna do is take the output shaft and hammer and smack it into position. All right, I had to change the battery out just as I was ready to smack the piston in. So I'll repeat what I said just before it went out. But basically what you wanna do is first you wanna make sure you line up that notch on the piston with the cutout in the case. And then from here, you're gonna take your output shaft and smack it into position. So go ahead, a few smacks all the way around. If it's not collapsing into the pocket right away after a few smacks, stop, pull the piston out, however you need to get it out, pliers, air, whatever, and check the seals because that tells me that they're probably hung up, particularly this inboard-most seal. Hear that flat report? That tells you it's fully seated. It should not take more in terms of like force, swinging force, you know, with the hammer than what you just saw. Okay, that was a good installation. All right, lubricate your bushing if you haven't done so already. And then you want to position this thing based on where you want to attack it from, because you want to make sure that your snap ring is engaged on all 4 locking bosses here on the return spring assembly. So, you know, you want to come in such that your pliers are basically right here in between 2 bosses, and that'll ensure that, you know, you get it in there correctly. I've seen these transmissions come in where only 3 out of the 4 tabs are engaged. No issues with the, you know, with the piston popping out or anything like that, but you don't want to take any chances. So with all return spring assemblies like this that have locking bosses of any kind or description, you want to make sure that you engage all of them. Oops, I'm going a little bit too far. And then with this thing, you want to try to get it as centered on the return spring as you can, even if you have to kind of dangle, you know, over a lug like what I'm doing here. It's not ideal, but it is what it is. Let me go get my long screwdriver. Sometimes you're going to have to manipulate this return spring around the journal down there, because it'll want to get caught on the snap ring groove or even the top of the journal. I mean, it shouldn't take all that much manipulation, but sometimes you're going to have to do it. Now the camera is literally right in the way where I normally would come in. So I'm going to try to see if I can get this thing installed. Maybe come in this way, you know, with the snap ring ends facing me. Yeah, we'll see how this works out. Kind of have my doubts. All right, I need a step stool or something, or I think I'm gonna need one. Let's see. I'm standing on the engine stand itself. This stand's pretty beefy, and you know, you could stand on it. I'm not saying you should swing from it or hang from it, but if you needed to for whatever reason, you probably could. Yeah, camera's in the way. Sorry, I have to get this installed, and then we'll bring you back for the rest of the guts. Alright, now that the low reverse piston return spring assembly are all in the case, it's time to pile in everything else insofar as the gear train is concerned. So here we have our bearing. This is going to be our rear ring gear. Now our rear planet. So our bearing. Okay, when it comes to planets in these transmissions, I've said this in a few of my videos as I make a mess of that thing. You do not need to upgrade to 5-pinion front and rear planets, even for racing applications. It's simply not necessary. The 4-pinion planets are perfectly fine, unless there is a restriction in the system. So this tab, it's going to go at the 5 o'clock position, and it'll drop right in. If this was like upside down, it wouldn't go in. It can only go in one way. Okay, this is going to be our selective steel. And the number 4 is on the little tab here that goes at the 5 o'clock position that faces up or faces you. And then the rest of the clutch pack, steel clutch until you run out of them. So these are 70 thou thick, the standard steel plates. So we're coming with a new steel module, tubular steels for the low reverse and reverse input to reduce drag and allow for additional cooling to pass through these respective clutch packs. Okay, this steel module is made by, I believe, Raybestos, but it could just as easily be Alto. I admit, I don't remember. But either one is fine. Borg-Warner is also fine. Borg-Warner frictions are fine. Okay, we're going with high energy here. You can go with Raybestos blues. You can go with Alto reds. I mean, you know, whatever you want. Just a note about the Raybestos blues is they hold like no other clutch, but they are really not ideal for the street because of the what I will call quote unquote normal stresses that a transmission sees, a clutch pack sees during the course of everyday driving. Okay, hear that sound? That's a sound of a healthy low roller clutch. So for our center support, we have a brand new Borg-Warner low roller clutch assembly. These center supports will retro to TH350s as well. The center support, the race, the whole kit and caboodle. It's a drop-in deal. You do not have to modify it in any way, shape, or form. Make sure you see front here. That's the Sonics, Sonics race. You will not reuse the factory race. Okay, sun gear. So here are notches, our wide bushing. And there it goes, and then now we're going to go ahead and put our snap ring in. And you want to have this snap ring such that the ends straddle the anti-clunk spring. If you have overlap between the snap ring and the anti-clunk spring, there is a small possibility, but a possibility that the reaction that's going on inside the case at some point may pop the snap ring out. And that would be more bad news, because you'd have no reverse. So very easy to position it. I mean, even if you don't get it quite right the first time, see how we're overlapped? It's an easy thing to correct. Just take your screwdriver, stick it right on the end of the snap ring there, and give it a few whacks until it rotates into position. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and put air in the low reverse clutch to make sure it works. These little orifices must be constant bleed to prevent centrifugal apply. I mean, when you're in reverse, you're going to have a ton of line pressure. Reverse is usually at idle in these transmissions, 460Es, about 90 to 120 psi. And as soon as you feather that gas, it'll spike up to like 175, 180. At full TV, you might actually be close to 300 psi in reverse, depending on what else has been done to the unit. So we have good apply, so we're ready to move on. So we have our sun shell, the bearing. Sonic Smart Shell is the best shell on the market. Alright, now you have your reaction shaft with a bearing. Sonic's makes these to the 03 and up 4L60E standard in terms of the bearing pocket here for your planetary bearing. So that's going to be this bearing here. This is the bearing that came with the reaction shaft. And then you have your shim. So a shim would go here if we needed to put this shim in because there's too much slop between the snap ring groove in the output shaft and the planet. So when you stick this in here, it should go all the way to the bottom, spline it in, and it should freewheel clockwise and lock counterclockwise. Okay, it's engaging the low roller clutch there. Alright, planet. In fact, I'm going to stick the shim in there just proactively. If I have to take it out, to take it out. But I'm going to put that in there. So here's your bearing. Alright, now we have the output shaft left to do. So all the kits come with a new snap ring for the output shaft. Up until a few years ago, they were painted yellow or green, yellowish green. Now they're this brown color. All right, the tripod leg is somewhat in the way. Let me see if I can still get to it. All right, let's see if I have access to the snap ring groove. It appears that I do. At some point, I need to get an attachment that will hold output shafts in position so I don't have to use my friggin' leg. Yeah, that's not going to work. All right. It's got a little bit of play. I'm glad I put that shim in there because it would have had a lot of play without it. It's got the right amount of play, you know, what I'm used to seeing. All right, sun gear. So spin all these parts. They should be nice and smooth. You shouldn't have any weird issues. Nothing should be binding. Once you have your hub installed, you know, all your guts in the back half of the case, if you truly want to check how well the low reverse clutch pack is applying, go ahead and introduce air back into that circuit. Now, as you saw, we could spin this nice and easy. It'll freewheel clockwise. Of course, it locks counterclockwise. But when you charge the low reverse clutch, that ain't moving. If you can still rotate this thing with a full charge of about 100 psi to the low reverse clutch, then there's a problem with the low reverse clutch. One of those stupid sealing rings or machine cut seals was lacerated on the way in. All right, we got our sun gear back in there. None worse for wear. Just go ahead and carefully lower your drum complex and mesh it. And you gotta mesh the lugs on the reverse input drum with those on the shell. And let's see where I'm at. I'm way off. All right, there we go. All right, once you hear it clunk down like that, all you really need to do is compare the top of the drum here to your deck surface for the pump. And as long as you have roughly the distance between this and this, you're good. And this should spin nice and free. All right, band is next. So engagement lugs on this side here, and your band anchor pin location on this side here, roughly at the 6 o'clock position, so you can line up your pin and install it. Just beat the drum. And I managed to screw that install up as well. In my defense, the camera's somewhat in the way, but it shouldn't have been complicated. All right, I literally have to move you. There we go. Sorry about that. I repositioned my band anchor pin point so I could seat the band anchor pin. Alright, if you guys watched my 4L60E no fourth gear on stump video, there was a kind of oddball failure at the band anchor pin location. What had happened was the band anchor pin, you know, the seat, if you will, actually failed. I guess either it broke off or got worn off by the band anchor pin. So if you kind of trace all the steps upstream of that band anchor pin location on the band itself as to, you know, what could have caused that, in my opinion, it was just a combination of things, multifactorial, but chief among them, an extremely harsh 1-2 shift. So, you know, that will mess up the band, break the band, cause a failure of the likes of which I'm describing, and that type of failure will basically destroy a whole lot of parts, including the case. That case had to be sent to the scrapyard. It was no good. I just want to put a little bit of extra assembly lube here right on this bushing. Some builders will actually chamfer this part of the bushing right over here to allow the pump to, you know, kind of slide in a little bit easier. I've never done it only because I'll be honest, I don't know that it's strictly speaking necessary. Most of your problems are not going to be because of that bushing, they're going to be because of the stator sealing rings getting hung up. Alright, we have a 95 thou thick selective washer there. And so what I'm doing now is just lubricating the perimeter O-ring on the pump. Alright, so here's where I was referring to earlier, where you should be able to feel the stator begin to slide over the sealing rings. Alright, and I'm trying to be super careful because I don't want to cut any of these things. And I think it's getting hung up on either the bottom sealing ring for the stator, the top sealing ring on the stator, which is common, or one of the sealing rings on the shaft. So possibly right here. I really hope that that number 70 washer is the meal ticket, because if it's not, I'm gonna have to do this all over again. Servo does not have to be installed for this process. The installation of the pump and getting in place sorted is completely independent of setting up band clearance, installing the servo, and all that stuff. One has literally nothing to do with the other from an assembly point of view. No dependencies on one by the other. I mean, you can install a servo first if you want, but you won't be able to check and measure band clearance until the pump is in. I'm not sure what the problem is here. So let me go off camera, see if I figure it out, and then we'll come back when... of course, as soon as I turn the friggin' camera off, guess what happens? It slides right in. it appears to be okay. Very frustrating. So it's stopping right at the pump O-ring, which is what you want. It's not going to get past the pump O-ring until you smack it in. And if I remember correctly, I think it was this transmission that was fighting me when it came to getting the pump out of it. I have... Sorry about that. Done like 4 4L60Es and this one in the past 2.5 to 3 weeks or so. I'm not losing track, but I think it might have been this transmission. Alright, screw these in finger tight as, you know, as far as you can get them in, and then just carefully smack this in with a brass drift and a hammer. I get my ear pro on. Alright, some of these may or may not go in with the impact. .13mm. I'm going to grab a pair of vice grips and I'm going to do a hasty end plate check to see if I'm even in the ballpark before I bother torquing it. There is a special tool that you can use that kind of engages that torque converter clutch O-ring seal groove there. It's actually two tools. One engages the groove and then the other tool engages the first tool. And between the two of them, you can lift up and check and play. Okay, this might actually be okay. That felt like about 15 thou. Let's torque up the bolts and see what happens. So 15 foot-pounds on pump to case bolts. You're going to lose about, I don't know, 3 to 5 thousandths of an inch between when you have them kind of seated fully and when you torque them. The gasket will compress. So crisscross pattern, like anything else that's, you know, round and has bolts. Any kind of torque wrench will work. A beam style, a click style, a digital one like this, doesn't really matter as long as it's calibrated. I mean, that's, you know, the main thing. I knew there was a bolt I didn't get to, and it's this one. All right, let me set up the dial indicator. We'll change the angle of the camera so you can see what's going on, and then we'll go ahead and check our end play and see where we are at. Between 15 and 25 thousandths is what I'm shooting for. All right, let me get that gauge in focus so you can see it. We're at 0. All bolts on the pump are torqued. Let's see what we have here. 12 thousandths. I can live with that. 12 is perfectly fine, especially for a high RPM build. You don't really want to be too much higher than 25 thousandths, because if you have a lot of longitudinal movement, those bearings between the input drum and the stator, the front planet capture bearing, and the thrust bearing that sits on the back of the front planet will take a beating. They will take a beating and eventually break up if there's enough high RPM passes or whatever. I'm not saying he's going to the track with this, but at the same time, you want to be a little bit on the tight side if you could, relative to being on the loose side. Alright, so now our next task is to trial fit the servo assembly and see what kind of band clearance we have, and then make adjustments as needed. Alright, now that we have the case fully assembled, it's time to test fit the servo assembly. So here we have the stock pin installed, no O-rings on the outside of the servo, either for second or fourth. And then here is the Sonics pin that came with the second gear servo kit. This is ultimately what's going to go in there, along with the requisite sealing rings and little O-ring seal. And they're all in this bag. Alright, so this is going to take some effort to get in, I imagine. So the purpose of doing this like this is to see what kind of band clearance we have preliminarily, and give us some sense of direction to quickly dial in the overall length of the Sonics pin to achieve the ideal band clearance, which is 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch longitudinal travel of the band along the reverse input drum. 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch. So I'm fully compressed on the band. Oops. Fully compressed. And I may not be able to get the servo in. Sonics does, snap ring, excuse me, Sonics does indicate that about 100 thousandths needs to be taken off. Alright, when you're doing this, make sure that you don't have your parking rod assembly and shift linkage installed, because that's really going to frustrate your attempts to get band clearance dialed in. So the snap ring groove is not fully exposed, so I know I need to go probably about, I'm going to estimate 25 thousandths shorter on the Sonics pin than this pin that's installed now. It's the GM3 groove pin. So I think I was like, what, 5.085 on that pin. I'll have to measure it again once I have this apart. And then we're going to grind on the Sonics pin to get it down to slightly below that, maybe another 20 to 25 thousandths to maybe upwards of 50 thousandths so that we can get our band clearance exactly how we want it. Alright, let's go ahead and remeasure the 3-groove pin so that we can figure out exactly what we want to do with the Sonics pin and know what we're working with from a starting point. So let's see, 5.085. So we probably need to be at 5.05 to 5.07. At least that's, I think, where I want to start with this pin here, and then micro adjust from there. The snap ring groove was about 90% exposed. If we say 100% exposure is what we would want, and at least the minimal amount of exposure to install the snap ring, 120% would be, that plus further inboard travel. So that's what we're going to do. Alright, so let me go ahead and take this to the grinder. We'll start grinding on it, and then we'll come back and do a test fit and see where we are at. Alright, so did some grinding. Now let's go ahead and measure. Again, sorry about that. So we're at, looks like 5.055. So let's go ahead and test fit this and see where we're at. Again, leave all seals and O-rings off. Alright, we'll go ahead and do our first trial fit with the Sonics pin. Again, no sealing rings, O-rings, or anything of the kind. Eyeballing the snap ring groove. It looks like it's a little bit more exposed, like a 99 to 100%. But let's see if we can actually get the snap ring installed so that we can do an initial band clearance check. And this tripod leg is right in my way, so I don't think we're there yet. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. We are very close. I'm thinking maybe another 20 to 25 thousandths of an inch has to come off. So let me go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and we'll do another test fit. Alright, taking off another 30 thousandths of an inch, so instead of 8.055, we're now at 8.025. So kind of creeping up on it. If this seems tedious, it's because it is, but I feel it's necessary to ensure that I don't overshoot and ruin a perfectly good pin. I mean, that's the main thing. I don't want to have to, go get another pin somewhere, and that would really suck. Alright, here's we're in. I'm going to check band clearance. We might be okay. So I'm going to reorient the camera so that you can see what I see, and we'll get the case horizontal, and then we can assess the band clearance visually and then make a decision from there. Okay, so there's our band We have a little ruler there along with an index mark on the band so you can better see it move. First thing I'm going to do is actually spin the output shaft counterclockwise. What that'll do is it'll allow the reverse input drum to spin, or cause the reverse input drum to spin, and that'll let me know if I'm binding up anywhere. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, that actually feels perfect. No hint of binding or any other issues associated with the movement of that drum inside the band. So now we're going to go ahead and do our test. Get the flashlight back on it. Okay, lining up this index mark with the ruler. And it looks like it's just shy of 1/8 of an inch. Like, this is perfect. Now, here's a cautionary tale. I have seen band clearance actually change ever so subtly when installed with all the seals and everything like that. So I don't know if that's going to be the case here, but you know, we'll check it again once we have it, you know, back installed for the quote-unquote final time, and we'll recheck our clearance to make sure it hasn't materially adversely changed. If it's going to change, you know, from what I remember of this happening, your band clearance will tighten, not loosen. So, in effect, that's not the end of the world. If it tightens, we just take you know, a little bit more off, maybe another 1/10 thou. If it loosens, then obviously that's a bigger problem. Alright, let me go ahead and prep it for final installation, and then we'll go ahead and put it back in and recheck our band clearance. Alright, now we're ready to assemble the servo for the final time. So after you wipe down the pin, you know, get all the grease off of it or whatever, just take a little sandpaper and kind of smooth out the end of the pin where you grind it upon. You know, get rid of any burrs, any other, you know, I guess artifacts or whatever, to make sure that the end of the pin's nice and smooth. And we'll go reach into our seal kit here. Alright, so you're only going to have one O-ring seal on the 4th piston. For your 2nd piston, the housing is going to take the 2 large O-ring seals, larger diameter, and then the D-ring seals, or, you know, rubber O-rings, D-rings, excuse me, are going to go here. Okay, getting crossed up real bad with my designations. D-shaped O-rings, how's that sound? It's unusually cold here. Today is April 4th, and we are usually in the mid-70s to low 80s this time of year. We're about, I want to say, 20 degrees below normal. This is allergy season as well, so if you hear me sniffling a little bit, I apologize. But I get allergies real bad between, you know, toward the end of March through middle of May, and then they kind of subside. Okay, so you're going to have 3 places on the pin itself that will take seals. You have 2 sealing rings that will go here. These are the Teflon split butt cut style sealing rings. They will go here, and then you'll have an O-ring, and that O-ring will go here. So I'll lube the pin just a little bit to kind of ease the passage for the O-ring. And just kind of carefully manipulate it, maneuver it past the snap ring groove for your return spring for the 4th clutch piston, or 4th gear. mean, ideally a 45-degree angle pick is what you want to use, not a small screwdriver like this. Alright, I'm glad I didn't break it. Alright, and then just put a whole bunch of green assembly lube all over these butt cut style sealing rings and then the O-ring. Alright, don't be afraid to get your pin filthy with this stuff. And lube the inner diameter here as well. You know, get as much assembly lube all over the place on this whole assembly as you can. I'll lube this up with the blue stuff. There we go. That slid in nice and smooth. Didn't feel like it was breaking or anything like that. Alright, the rest of the assembly is just like any other 2/4 servo. Alright, the Sonic's instructions has you install the washer, the 3/8 washer like this. So here it is, all ready to go. Alright, now it's ready to go. Alright, we'll go back to the case and install this thing for the final time and then do a check on our band clearance. Sorry, before we go back to the case, and I just noticed this, you want to scrutinize these D-ring seals, because they actually like to twist a little bit. And if you notice here, this is actually not fully installed. So if I had just tried to force feed the case, you know, with this thing caught up like this, it would most likely cut this, you know, this rubber sealing ring here. So you just want to go around, make sure that it's 100% in the groove. Okay, not an issue with the O-rings, but the D-rings, they can twist on you, and because these grooves are so finely machined, such that this D-ring barely fits in there, it's very easy for it to get a little bit twisted. Alright. I think it's good. So, lather everything up. And then you're going to do the same to the bore. So, I'm going to pre-lube the bore, and then next time you see me, we're going to be over there at the case installing this thing into the bore, hopefully for the final time. Okay, just double check your sealing rings here on the pin, make sure they're not protruding, and then make sure your end is free of any burrs or anything else that could potentially cause problems. Alright, now I believe we are ready to install this for the final time. Alright, go ahead and carefully insert the assembly into the case. And then take up your position here with the hammer. Carefully press it in. All right. The snap ring is not ideally positioned. I don't like to have overlap here where I have a notch. In fact, I'll show you real quick. So you see here the snap ring groove, or the notch rather, and the end of the snap ring is kind of jutting out a little bit. What I will do is I will take a hammer and I will tap this such that this end will move up, this end will move back, and no part of the snap ring will be exposed like that. I'll do that after we check our band clearance. Alright, go ahead and reinsert your slip yoke if you have one, and then start spinning the shaft counterclockwise, and make note of any drag. Okay, I don't feel any. So now we'll go ahead and check our band clearance. And of course I don't have my ruler. Let me see where I put it. And whether or not you want to go to this extent is up to you. You can generally eyeball this. Okay, that's the extent of our travel. It's about 1/8 of an inch, which is exactly what we want. So if you have excessive band clearance, all kind of problems can occur, including a very harsh 1-2 shift, breakage of the band, damage to the reverse input drum, and even in extreme cases or situations, damage to the case. As I mentioned earlier, I have that no 3/4 or no 4th gear stump video, and that's an example of one really extreme case and worst case scenario that could occur if band clearance is not well managed. So you want to make sure that you pay close attention to this aspect of these these transmissions when it comes to building them back up. All right, we're ready to move on to the case air check. I got to put the governor in, and then we'll go ahead and put the valve body of the case gasket on, bolt a test plate, and then we'll go ahead and do an air check. Okay, we have the test plate bolted, so we're going to go through and apply all of the clutch circuits as well as the band, both 2nd and 4th gear, using the orifices here on the test plate. Now for non-auxiliary valve body 700R4s, this is where you would put your nozzle for testing the forward clutch, but for auxiliary valve bodies, you'll actually use the feed pipe location right here on the pump. So we'll go ahead, we'll test forward clutch. All right, that's good. Here's 3/4. All right, remember we have a bleed orifice installed, so we're using about 100 psi of air, and there's actually no hole at this location in the gasket where this, where the hole in the test plate is. So the reply, not the reply. Well, I guess the reply is not going to be nearly as robust, all other things equal. Reverse input. Okay, same thing here. There is actually no orifice in the gasket itself, so we're having to go through paper. Okay, this is band release, this is 4th gear, this is 2nd gear. So what I like to do when I'm testing the servo is I'll put my hand over the servo cover. A few times in testing, I have found that the cover will fly off if the snap ring is not fully seated. So what you may want to do, and I did this with this one, is take your flat blade screwdriver and hammer and just lightly tap on the snap ring all the way around the diameter of the servo cover just to make sure it's fully seated. So we'll do 4th gear. All right, 2nd gear. Okay, this is band apply, that's for 2nd. And I'll show you where you would test this without this plate on here after we're done doing this test. Okay, low reverse. Okay, you also have reverse input down here. And then you have your governor feed. So you hear the governor weights moving when you put air. All right, so I'm happy with this. Let's go ahead and get this plate off of here. And then I'm gonna talk through something that I learned today from Transgo in a conversation with Glen. And there's two Glens at Transgo for those that are, frequent contact with them. There's one Glen that's been there for like 30 years and another one that's been there for like 4 years. I spoke to the latter Glen and he calls himself Glen 2.0, so just in case you're wondering. But I will share the substance of that discussion and what I learned and how that could change or maybe impact the way you deal with the fourth accumulator. Okay, we have the plate off, so what I'm going to do is talk you through what I learned from Transgo, and then I'm going to show you how to air test this entire case without a plate. So first, I spoke with Transgo this morning, had a couple of questions about some other things, and then I turned the discussion to this transmission because I wanted to pick their brains a little bit. And I spoke to Glen, who, again, I mentioned there's two Glens. This is going to be Glen 2.0 that I'm referring to. And he and I had talked about exactly what the Transgo 2 and 3 kit does. And, some of the features that it has and, the reasons why some of the instructions have you do what they have you do. So one of the things that he mentioned to me has to do with the fourth accumulator and blocking it off. He agrees that that's also a good move for anything, high performance, heavy duty, high stall. What I did not realize and what he informed me was that if you leave the piston, the pin, and I mean, it's up to you if you want to put a spring in there or not, because it really doesn't matter. But what he said was that if you put the piston with a seal and the pin back in, this will actually help facilitate function of the 1-2 accumulator. Now, if you understand hydraulics of these things and the 1-2 accumulator and how it works, you'll see that there are passages that flow from the accumulator here, this is the 1-2, and kind of through the spacer plate and gaskets and into the 3-4. Okay, so here's your feed, here's your passage, this is how it goes on the case. So if you look at a hydraulic circuitry diagram for these transmissions and for 4L60Es, you'll see that there is some interplay, if you will, between these two accumulator circuits. And what he recommended was that if you want to keep your 1-2 shift quote-unquote streetable, in other words, you don't want it to be so abrupt and harsh at part throttle, even with a higher stall converter, you may want to consider leaving this fourth accumulator piston and pin installed with a seal. So I'm going to actually do that from now on for all my street-driven vehicles. Now, he said that there's no adverse effects. You're not endangering the transmission in any way, shape, or form if you leave them out. And I've left them out, and I've never had one come back because of some failure associated with my decision to do that. However, he said that by keeping it in here, it allows that 1-2 accumulator circuit to function a little bit more comprehensively, especially in lower stall, mild to moderate performance applications. So that's what we're going to do. And this check ball, you can leave that out. It doesn't matter. But the piston and the spring and the pin with the seal, seal on the piston, I'm going to start reinstalling that stuff even when I block the fourth accumulator off for anything that's predominantly street driven. All right, I have my clutch circuits labeled here. As you can see, we have forward clutch 3-4, reverse input that's down here, and boost. And then we have our orifice for our low reverse clutch. And then we have our band apply. And this is going to be for fourth gear. And then over here is going to be for second gear. So it's going to be tricky to get to some of these, some of these orifices, some of these locations. So I'm actually going to use different, two different nozzles. One has a vacuum hose on it, so that'll help. But here's forward clutch. All right. All right, now we'll do 3-4, and I'm gonna have to switch nozzles. And I just wanted to turn the air compressor off so it doesn't click on when I'm doing this. So this is gonna be a little bit trickier, like I said. So you want to hold it like this to the best of your ability. And then immediately after you charge the circuit, you may have to pull the nozzle away a little bit to allow air to bleed out of it. Okay, very robust. All right, reverse input, same deal. All right, we'll switch nozzles again, and then we'll test the boost circuit. So what you do is you put your finger and you press down on the boost valve, and then you charge the circuit, and you want the boost valve and sleeve really specifically to push up against your finger. All right, so we know that the boost valve and the pressure regulator valve circuitry is all working as intended. Low reverse. All right, so let's go ahead and test our servo assembly. Switching out. All right, as I mentioned, make absolutely sure that this cover and that snap ring are fully installed. The snap ring is in its groove as it should be. It's like I'm not entirely on the orifice there. You know, I may be able to get the other one in there. Nope. I think this length of hose is just a little bit too long, at least for this. I mean, it's not covering it, so that's why you're hearing all that air whooshing. Okay. All right, that's second gear apply. And this is fourth gear, but it's going to be very difficult to get in here. All right, I'm gonna just do it here. This is the exhaust for fourth gear, but you can test apply. You're just going backwards. All right, you want to test this multiple times just to make sure this cover is in there and that there's not going to be any problems. All right, so that covers the case belly. We have our check balls installed, as you can see. I'm not going to install the fourth check ball. Like I said, it's not functional. Governor is installed, so now I'm just going to put in the shift linkage. We'll install the plate, auxiliary valve body, 1-2 accumulator housing, wiring harness with TCC solenoid, main valve body, filter extension tube, and pan and extension housing, and then that'll be it for this transmission. All right, now I'll go ahead and do the shift linkage. Very straightforward install. 704s, when it comes to the selector shaft anyway, typically don't give you the kind of grief that you get from 4L60Es. They usually just slide right in and slide right out in this assembly. So grab your rooster comb. That's going to be your manual valve linkage arm engagement point on the rooster comb. It obviously faces the case. Slide it in, and then you want to make sure that you can put this thing fully into park. This is going to be your parking pole, because that'll allow you to get your parking pole guide plate bolts installed. So here's your guide plate. Just come with it like this. You know, leave it there for now if you want. And then all we're going to do is engage the selector with our rooster comb. Make sure it's on there. And come with our castellated nut. 15mm wrench is needed to cinch this up. And you want to make sure this is tight. A couple of these have come loose on me on these transmissions and 4L60s, 4L80s as of late. And I'm not sure if it's, you know, maybe something I'm not doing correctly, or there's maybe fatigue, you know, fatigue in the threads. But either way, it's something you want to double check. And this one might be wanting to give me a little grief now. You'll have trouble putting the vehicle into either park or other range positions, and it'll gradually get harder and harder to do until you won't be able to, you know, shift your gears on the column or the floor shifter at all. And that is a surefire sign that this nut has come loose. So, kind of awkward to get at. And there is a torque spec on this, believe it or not. I don't know what it is offhand. But as long as it's cinched up really tight, you should be fine. Alright, 13 millimeter on your parking pole guide plate bolts. Okay, this company that built this transmission put a couple of these bolts in the pan bolt locations. Thought that was interesting. And then we'll torque these to 15 foot-pounds. I think they take between 15 and 18. And if you're not sure what torque to use for a given fastener, this is what I've done. I don't know if it's correct, but you know, so I guess take this advice with a grain of salt. However, what I do is I'll just, you know, look at the diameter of the bolt, you know, not the head, the bolt itself, you know, threaded portion, or the nut, and I will consider, you know, like kind fasteners with known torque specs and determine, you know, what the best fit would be, and then I'll kind of work my way up. So, for example, let's just say you didn't know what the bolt torque for this was, but you did know that the pump half bolts and the pump to case bolts, which are, I believe, the similar diameter of about 15 to 18 foot-pounds, you can go 15 to 18 foot-pounds. If you're, you know, maybe a little unsure, or you want to be cautious, start at like 2/3 to 3/4 of that value and work up. So that's what I do. It helps me get my bearings and torque something to a, you know, a known specification, so that I can be assured that I'm, you know, kind of doing things correctly. All right. Now that that's installed, I'm going to go ahead and install all the case belly components. So I'm going to put the case gasket, spacer plate, the valve body, the spacer plate gasket, and then the accumulator and auxiliary valve body, and we'll follow that up with the valve body. Then we'll do the harness. And I actually may install the harness first because I have largely unobstructed access here, and then from there I'll just dangle it over the side. Alright, get the assembly lube out. Okay, double check your check ball locations. You will have a ball in the bathtub here if you have a first gen 700R4 valve body with no auxiliary valve body. And then you also have a TV exhaust check ball here. It's 5/16 if this transmission is like virgin, it's never been worked on, but most builders leave it out. We don't have one to install here, so we're not going to install it. All right, here is our case gasket. Go ahead, put that on. All right, spacer plate. So I'll just real quick talk about the feed orifice sizing. So this is the Transgo 2 and 3 recommended feed hole sizes for all of our shift feeds. So starting with second gear, they recommend anything from 86 thousandths up through to 101 thousandths. We're going to just go 93 thousandths. And these hole sizes are based on a factory stall converter, so 16 to 1800 stall. This particular vehicle is going to have a 2500 stall converter, so he may find that this is a little conservative, but I want to start with a baseline first, and then if he wants to fine tune it, he can drill out the hole sizes as needed. So second gear is 93 thou, third gear is 157 thou, third gear exhaust is 157 thou, band release is 110 thou, fourth gear is 157 thousandths. We've plugged the manual low because with this kit they reroute the circuitry such that when you're in manual low, you're actually dual feeding the low reverse piston. So those holes that you drilled in the valve body, the hole through the bathtub, and then the inboardmost hole on the 3-2 control valve, and technically the other hole too, is all designed to facilitate dual feeding the low reverse clutch when in manual low, and holding manual low first gear at any road speed, any gear. We call that gear command. So that's one of the main features of this kit. And the reason why they have you install those orifice cup plugs into the low reverse feed passage as well as the governor feed is so that you can preserve forward clutch oil, keep that circuit energized, it doesn't bleed off when you're in manual low, and also so that governor pressure isn't going to overcome throttle pressure when you're in manual low and force an upshift. Otherwise, these transmissions of 4L60Es are designed to force a 1-2 shift if they detect road speed and or RPM is greater than a certain threshold. So this kit kind of overcomes that, defeats it, however you want to say it, so that you can keep that manual low, in first gear at any road speed and back shift at any road speed. I don't know how often this customer's going to spend in manual low. I mean, he really didn't specify one way or another when it comes to, needing that. I have another customer that we're going to be building a 204R for that absolutely wants that functionality. So I'll probably film a series of videos on that so that you can kind of see how we do gear command there. We're going to be installing the CK Performance Master Reprogramming Kit. I've used that kit multiple times in 204Rs. That's a very good kit. I like it. Makes setup and calibration very easy. It's broadly similar to this kit for the 700s, to be honest. Alright, here is our 1-2 accumulator. You're going to have the piston in just like this, and then the spring like so. And then just drop it on in. Get it aligned with your bolts. And then we need to put a check ball here for our auxiliary valve body. It's like all the deliveries are happening today at one time, right around now, which is unusual. Usually they happen a little later in the afternoon. It's mid-morning around 11 o'clock here, Friday, April 4th, 2025, in case you were wondering. So that's where it goes. 91, 92, this is an orifice, I'm sorry, not an orifice. This is a captured check ball. It's got a capsule. Prevents you from losing the check ball. Unfortunately, we don't have that here. Alright, so we have two small bolts, 10mm, and then we have an 8mm bolt that goes here. Then there's a gold bolt that goes right here. And then this is the location of your feed pipe. Alright, you're going to have one long bolt that's virtually identical to the bolts in the 4L60E that go through the pressure switch manifold. So that goes in this location here. And then you're going to have your two short bolts. So 4 of these 10mm short bolts total these auxiliary valve body units. 95 to 100 inch-pounds is all you really need in terms of bolt torque for everything on the case belly. And that includes the 2 bolts for the TCC lockup solenoid. All right, I'm going to fit the wiring harness in there now. So the wiring harness I always use for these transmissions is going to be Rostra. Part number is 74425L, 82 to 93. Now, for first generation valve bodies, 82 to 86, they actually had more than just the 4th clutch pressure switch and you know, the little temperature sensor active. So I do not know if there is a equivalent Rostra harness for those earlier units. It's been a while since I've actually built a 700R4 from 82 to 86 for a legitimate factory application, meaning, you know, the vehicle was completely unaltered. All the pre-existing functionality was retained, and the computer was controlling the TCC. All right, I want to make sure this is actually in. All right, it's in there as far as it'll go. All right, go ahead, position your little linkage arm for the manual valve. And then get the manual valve ready. So here are your 2 check balls that you're going to be installing in auxiliary valve body equipped 700R4s. You will not be installing the check ball here. So you'll notice these dots, these all indicate where we drilled holes. It's 157 thousandths hole through this part of the casting, going from here to here, but I actually drilled it from this angle because I started it with this angle and I was too steep in my approach, and I was going to drill right through the, you know, right through the entire valve body and miss the bathtub. So my recommendation is to come with a drill bit here. I did nick it a little bit there. It's not going to make a difference. And then you're going to have an exhaust hole at this location here. Okay, you're going to drill that, and then you're going to drill a hole right here. Okay, all of these holes are designed to facilitate the re-engineering of the manual low apply circuit to make it more robust and to give you gear command. So it was incredibly helpful for Transgo to explain all that, but the one thing I wish they would do is put all of that information in their kits. And that's true of any shift kit maker. I'm the type of person that likes to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, because if something goes wrong, I want to know what, if anything, that I may have done could have contributed to, you know, the problems that might have surfaced. All right, this valve body is a mixture of 700R4 and 4L60E bolts, and so we're gonna put those back in because there's literally zero harm in having them, you know, on the transmission. That's what it came in with, so that's what it's going to go out the door with. It did come in with 2 of these little discs. That I'm not sure why. Maybe it'll occur to me as I'm putting this thing back together. And I'll say, oh, that's why that company did that. Yeah, maybe I need to put the other disc back on. I don't know if that'll be the situation or not, but... Okay, here is going to be our TV linkage arm bracket. So just like that. Let me go about it like this. Let's see. Yep, there we go. When you are setting up your TV cable, ideally, you want to have this plunger have a little bit of preload on your valve here. I'm sorry, this actuator arm have a little bit of preload on the plunger, excuse me. I guess indirectly that'll preload the valve. But what this will do is, as soon as you mash the gas, you will get immediate TV pressure rise, and that's what you want. You want that rise to be immediate. And all things equal, you want that rise to kind of stay ahead of torque input on your engine as you're accelerating and gaining RPM. So that will ensure that you will always have enough peak line pressure to meet the demands that you are putting on the transmission. I'm kind of mincing my words, but hopefully that comes across clearly. If not, well, I apologize. Alright, now we have our feed pipe. So we can connect fourth clutch pressure switch if we want. And then our feed pipe is going to travel from the auxiliary valve body here to the engine here. Engine. To the pump. What the hell am I talking about? Engine. Yeah, it's going to go right to the engine. If you haven't figured out by now, you haven't already surmised, this transmission has been kind of a bear to put together. It is by no stretch of the imagination the most smooth sailing of 700 R4s, when it comes to pure assembly. And I don't know why. There's no rhyme or reason. It had nothing to do with the previous company did. Sometimes when you're building a transmission, it just gives you a whole lot of grief for no apparent reason. All the rest of the bolts that you're going to be installing are all the same, in terms of their length, their thread pitch, and all that stuff, except for the detent roller bolt. Let's see, where the hell does this go? Alright, now I'm going to put all the rest of the bolts in. This bolt going like this, I think. This doesn't look right. I think I went like this. Alright, we have a filter pickup extension tube that we purchased from Summit Racing, so that would allow us to reinstall the deep pan that the customer had paid this company to add on to the build. And so I want to make sure that thing fits. If it doesn't, then I'm going to have to install a factory pan. If it doesn't work, which would suck if that ended up being the case. Alright, I gotta actually go find a retainer for this location here that will hold the feed pipe in place so that we can install our golden bolt. I'm glad they included the golden bolt, but it sucks they did not include a retainer for it. Alright, unfortunately I was not able to find a legitimate factory clip for here, but what I did is I took a EPC retention bracket from a 4L60E and modified it to work here. So that should hold, and there should be clearance to get around here when it comes to installing the pan. And I've done that before, so I know it works. All right. So it's time to zip the rest of the bolts down so that we can torque them up. So like I said, 95 to 100 inch-pounds. I will typically do 98 inch-pounds on all the bolts. We cannot forget our little temperature switch. Okay. No particular torque sequence for these valve bodies. As you saw, I bolted this down and torqued it. It's not going to hurt anything. Main thing is you want to make sure you hit all your bolts. All right, last bolt we need to torque that has been installed is going to be this little 8mm bolt down here. Alright, why aren't you going in? Always something. All right, last bolt before the filter. All right, 704s with these pipes. You gotta kind of push the D10 roller down and kind of allow yourself some space to install your bolt. So 15 foot-pounds here. Now get her done. All right, here is our filter pickup extension tube and our filter. So it looks like this is designed to have a gasket here, you know, just like this, and then another gasket on the filter. So let me validate that's the case, and then we'll resume. All right, so this thing definitely needs a filter seal rather. So you need a total of 2 of these seals. You're going to need one here for the pickup extension tube itself, and then you're going to need another one for the main filter going into the pickup extension tube. So let's see if I can get this to slide on, and we can install it, and that's how it's going to go. And the pan just goes right over top. And that's basically it. So let me put the pan on, and then we'll get this thing off the stand on the bench, and we'll go ahead and summarize. All right, we are finally at the end of the road. We have brought the Nemesis back to life and did all the things that frankly should have been done by the company that originally built this transmission but failed to do. So I don't want to make this long, drawn out and winded, because I mean this whole rebuild was just one long and drawn out journey. From start to finish. So that said, it was also quite enjoyable. We got to do a lot of different things, install some really high performance, well-made parts and components that now have upgraded the transmission to the extent we can be confident that it'll survive and last and ultimately be fit for purpose and meet the customer's needs. So that was really the overarching goal here, right? To kind of correct everything that the previous reman company did wrong or didn't do at all, and get the customer a transmission that will ultimately bring him many, many, many more miles of enjoyment out of his truck. So with that said, I will go ahead and put part numbers where I can. You'll have already seen them. I will go ahead and annotate the video, which you will have already seen as well, with the part number for that pickup extension tube for the filter. That was one of the key things that they left out, so I wanted to make sure that was corrected before this thing went out the door, and we were able to do that. Alright, so 2500 stall converter. The converter that he got from them, as far as I know, was okay. One of the few things that didn't either straight up malfunction or otherwise give him grief, but now that we've gone back with it, it's set up in a way that I think will be fit for purpose, and like I said, give the customer what he's looking for. So with all that said, if you've watched all the videos in this mini-series and kind of followed along from start to finish in the saga, the Nemesis, I want to thank you so much for all of your time that you have spent viewing these videos. I mean, hopefully they're informative for you, educational, and to some extent entertaining, even if it's my expense. I know I've been fumbling around with stuff, it was just one of those kind of builds. So but once the dust has settled and everything is all said and done, I think that we're in good shape. All right, well, as always, thank you so much for watching. Again, greatly appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care.